going to just read a short paragraph to explain the situation with regard to this virtual meeting. This Scrutiny Committee meeting is being conducted remotely in accordance with the coronavirus regulations and the remote meetings protocol agreed by the Council, which will operate alongside the Council's standing orders to ensure that we continue to take democratic decisions in an open and transparent manner. I would remind members that this meeting is being live streamed to the public, and can I please request that you all switch off your cameras and mute your microphones when you're not speaking to ensure there's no unnecessary background noise and to help with the audio and visual quality of the broadcast. The Council's standing orders and code of conduct will apply at all times during this meeting in the same way as ordinary meetings, and members should conduct themselves accordingly. So thank you, and if I might say welcome to all officers and to the Cabinet Member, Councillor Giles. I now have the agenda. Are there any apologies, please?
Councillors William Routley and Stephen Marshall, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chair. It's on page 17, item 7, with regards to the Tredegar Park Primary School. I'm Chair of Governors on that meeting, on that school.
Ah, right. Thank you for that, Trevor. I would suggest on that basis, if that issue arises during the course of the meeting, you just withdraw from any comment. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. So now we move on to page 3 of the document, which is the service plan mid-year reviews. Now, who do we hand over for this, please? Is it Sarah?
Councillor Watkins, the Cabinet Member, Councillor Gail Giles will be doing an introduction today to the mid-year review.
Thank you for that. Good morning, Councillor Giles. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So the Education Service continues to develop and deliver effective leadership and provision, which has been reflected in the response of the service to the COVID-19 pandemic. When schools closed in March 2020, Central Education Officers worked with schools to provide childcare and support for children of critical workers and to vulnerable learners. In addition, they continued to work closely with schools leading up to the reopening of schools in September, in line with Newport City Council recovery objectives and Welsh Government guidance linked to school operations and the development of blended learning. As a result, the Education Service Plan has been revised to ensure that central services are focused on the local authority COVID-19 recovery aims and continue to progress key objectives aligned to recommendations made by ESTIN following the November 2018 and the Joint Services Inspection that took place in December 2019. Furthermore, actions to address local priorities identified through comprehensive monitoring and self-evaluation have been progressed. School finances remain a priority for the Education Service and continues to be an area of focused activity. Throughout the school closures, central teams continue to work in collaboration with schools to review school finances and to ensure the provision offers value for money. Schools are responding to individualised recommendations made by central services at the conclusion of the reviews. Due to the pandemic, Welsh Government has determined that school performance measures such as attendance and external examination outcomes will not be reported upon, as has happened in previous years. However, the local authority officers are working with the EAS to ensure that school development plans are appropriately aligned to the outcomes of summer 2020 results and the development of blended learning in order that children and young people continue to receive the most effective education possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giles. So now do we move to you, Sarah, to expand on the report?
Yes, Councillor Watkins. So today you'll see from our mid-year service plan that the majority of actions are based around a green indicator to demonstrate that we're on track. The mid-year report itself has been tweaked in light of COVID and dovetails into the newly revised Education Achievement Service Plan, which has also been revised in light of COVID. We have a minority of red indicators. Today I've brought my senior leadership team to Scrutiny so they might answer questions that you might have to ask. So in the room today we have Andrew Powells, Deputy Chief Education Officer. We have Deborah Weston, who's the Service Manager for Resources and 21st Century Schools, and Katie Rees, who is responsible for inclusion within the service area. I'm sure that you've read the report in depth. Could I suggest that perhaps you begin to ask some questions around the service plan?
Absolutely, we have, I'm sure, a lot of questions. I am just struggling to get up the chat. Oh my goodness, I've lost the little screen at the bottom, which tells me, oh dear, it mutes me, it gives me all the instructions. Now it's come back. Neil, could you just give me information about, oh, I think I've got it now. All right, so councillors, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. So I think I haven't got any raised hands at the moment, so I will start off some questions. And it's good to see that you've got all your officers with you this morning, Sarah. Can I ask, first of all, if we could have an explanation, please, of the grant for GEMS?
Okay, is this because it's associated with a risk area, Councillor Watkins?
Yes.
Okay, so throughout Wales, some local authorities are entitled to a grant around supporting pupils that are from a GRT background or have English as additional languages. Those local authorities tend to be Newport, Cardiff, Swansea and Wrexham predominantly. And we've been notified by Welsh Government that they feel that the calculation of that grant is somewhat skewed, and they'd like to go back to basics in looking at the calculation of the grant per population. So we are expecting, and it is possible as well, that Welsh Government will reduce their contribution. So we've got two issues there. We've got the fact that a lower rate of income might come to Newport because other populations across Wales have grown. So there might be more to share, and also the grant itself may reduce. So this presents a significant risk to us in Newport because we will be unable to continue to support the level of staffing, which is 100% grant income.
Well, thank you very much for that explanation, and that clearly is a worry because we do have a substantial number of children where English is their second language. So I think we'll need to keep a very close eye on that and how you're able to move forward with it.
Fortunately, Councillor Watkins, the recalculation of the grant, and in light of COVID, the recalculation has been delayed, and so we've managed to continue with the same level of grant. That's extremely valued because the work that GEMS do, as you know, is absolutely crucial for the development of our learners in Newport. Yes. But what we do have is good representation on the working party for Welsh Government, which is aligned to supporting EAL children. So our voices have been heard strongly, and we are hoping that additional money will come through the system. Our cabinet member has also been exceptionally supportive and has ensured that WLGA have also heard the strong messages about the need for the GEMS grant. And so we're hoping that Welsh Government will be able to support us in the long term. So it is a risk area, but we're doing our best to make sure that it's fully understood in terms of the impacts if that is reduced.
Thank you for that answer. Now I see that Councillor Cleverly has a hand raised. Would you like to go ahead, Councillor Cleverly?
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Sarah.
Morning.
My question is about the attendance of young people in school. You can see it's dropped. It's 50%, is that correct?
No.
No?
It fluctuates. I mean, what I can say is it fluctuates on depending on the week. From the September return till now, I would say that our best attendance rate is around 80. Is around. Andrew, would you be able to help me? We've had 83%, and we've had higher.
Right.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Powell. We have the data leading up for the last half term, and it was very low at the beginning of September. There's lots of concerns about coming back to school with the pandemic ongoing. But over the course of the term, it did increase, and just before half term, we were about 88 to 89% for both primary and secondary. So it is still much lower than we want, and it's much lower than it has been previously. But actually, compared to other local authorities, I think we were about 9th in the ranking of the 22 local authorities before half term. So whilst it's still a concern and it's not good enough, comparative to other local authorities, we were doing okay. During the last term, we've launched a new media campaign about trying to encourage families to feel confident to come back to school and for it to be safe. That does appear to be working because the rate has increased over half term, but we know it's going to be a long journey, which is complicated because at the moment we are not allowed to use powers linked to fines or prosecutions for non-attendance. Welsh Government have withdrawn that across Wales. So it's very much focused on goodwill and encouraging families to return. We have the carrot, but we have no stick at the moment in terms of attendance.
Can I ask if the EWOs are still working? Because they was reduced at one point, wasn't they?
Well, overall, the resource did reduce through the council at various stages over the past 5 years. Nevertheless, where we have our EWOs, they didn't ever stop working. So even during the time where there was hub activity, so when the schools weren't officially open, but the hub childcare facility was there at primary level, our EWOs were still supported in terms of welfare checks to make sure that vulnerable children were safe, and they've continued normal business. So what you see is our EWOs continuing to drop postcards, to knock doors, to work with schools. It very much is business as usual, if you could describe it as that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lacey?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a question which is relating to action number 2 with regard to the Eston recommendation number 2, to deal with the attainment gap between the key vulnerable groups of learners, specifically relating to additional learning needs. Really, as obviously we've all children had 6 months off school. The homeschooling was very different between all the schools. Some were much better than others. But obviously our ALN children and the ones that needed a bit of vulnerable have lost out on a little bit more than maybe the mainstream learners, especially now that there are some companies that can no longer go into schools to help, basically having the additional help for other children. And I'm just wondering what we're doing as a local authority to help our ALN children across the board, and to make sure that all of the schools, that we're on a level playing field, really. And that's why, like I said, I'm a bit wishy-washy of a question. It's a bit disjointed. So aside from the ALN, what are we doing to boost our ALN learners across the city? But also, what are we doing to ensure that our schools are on an even keel with the home learning that they're offering? Because I know some are Google Classroom, some are Hub, some are Seesaw, and they're not all as good as each other. And I think it's so sort of two things but related, if you can make out a question. That one, sorry.
Councillor Lacey, if it's okay with you, I'll split it into two parts.
Yes.
I'm going to answer the first part, which is about the quality of distance and blended learning, which is progressing. And I'm going to pass over then to Katie Rees, who's our Head of Inclusion, to describe how additional learning needs were supported both during lockdown and beyond. Now we're back in full capacity in schools. So the first part is, obviously you'll recognise that the teaching profession have worked incredibly hard during this period, but this was all new to them. So we wouldn't have had necessarily the skills to be able to present distance and blended learning in a meaningful way. So during the lockdown period, while hubs were open, the EAS supported with a huge amount of professional learning. And that was ensuring that schools had the right platform to work on. So you described Google Classrooms. It was important that a school used a specific platform to ensure that learners weren't confused and parents weren't confused. So we were looking for some consistency. We were looking for coordination at that time. So for instance, that there was the right level of science distance learning that was presented as much as maths, so there wasn't any shortfalls in subject areas. And the professional learning also supported teachers and teaching assistants with how-to. So how do you present a PowerPoint presentation to learners? How do you do pre-recorded lessons? How do you present this in a digital fashion? So the professional learning took place over the summer to enable the teaching profession to develop further over the autumn period. There was lots of international research which was also reflected upon, and we followed the work of Dr. Simon Breakspear throughout this, who said that during the summer period it was about catch up and check-in to make sure that we were supporting pupils emotionally, and that the autumn period would be about refining and improving, and that's exactly what we're doing now. So we've just sent out now a blended learning survey to all schools in Newport, to which they're responding to, and we've asked them to describe best practice, the challenges they face, and what elements of blended learning they have in place. So do they have a specific plan should self-isolation happen, or if a circuit break happens? And you won't be surprised to hear that they do have a plan in place. We've checked that in some schools, not all schools, by doing virtual school development plan checks as well. The critical element to this in moving forward is, does a school have the relevant quality assurance system? So that you'll know that normal quality assurance in a school, when you're looking at teaching and learning, includes things like book scrutiny. It includes learning walks, the voice of the child or the learner, the community's view. So is this in place for blended learning now? With these surveys, we're able to respond with the EAS in two ways. So we're able to identify those schools that haven't got quality assurance in place, and then support them with the appropriate methods of how you do that. So for instance, are you able to give live learner feedback during blended learning? For those schools that say that they have got quality assurance processes in place, we'll be then working with challenge advisors, and they'll be verifying that those quality assurance processes for blended learning are up to scratch, so that there is a level of consistency across the local authority and it's working for individual schools. So there's two pieces of follow-up for support, and they will be bespoke to each Newport school. If you don't have a quality assurance process in place, you're unable as a senior leader in school to know if your lessons that are being provided in a blended fashion are being differentiated for your children, for instance, with additional learning needs. And so that's just another example of why the quality assurance is critical to the improvement and development of blended learning. So that's the first part of the answer. Would you mind if I passed over to Katie now to describe how ALN learners have been supported?
That's absolutely fine. Yes.
Katie?
Okay.
Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Councillor Watkins. Yeah, at the start of the lockdown period, we worked with head teachers to create a vulnerable and statemented pupils risk assessment so that all vulnerable youngsters and ALN youngsters could be tracked throughout the period to ensure that appropriate learning was either taking place at home or any resources ALN youngsters needed were given to the home to support them. So for example, if you had a statemented pupil who needed a specific piece of equipment to access their learning at home, the school provided that for them and tracked it through this vulnerable group risk assessment. And if a young person wasn't accessing the education that they should be at home, there were opportunities for some of them to be brought into the childcare hubs to be supported as well. Throughout the lockdown period and throughout the summer, we also created a helpline for parents, for schools and professionals to access advice from educational psychologists and teacher advisors on how to support our more vulnerable ALN youngsters to make sure that they weren't dropping behind. Since schools have restarted, we have had educational psychologists clinics with each of the schools in the authority to ensure that any youngster with ALN needs, their needs are addressed and discussed with that EP to look at what interventions can be put into place for the young people. We also looked at the well-being of all our youngsters within the schools, including our ALN youngsters, because our belief is we need to make sure the well-being is right for the young people to be able to access the learning. So we've also commissioned through a Welsh Government grant a whole school approach to well-being. It's a health team that's coming in to support training and interventions with all our schools within Newport. So they're working with schools on a cluster basis to ensure that well-being is addressed within the school as a whole school priority. We also, through the whole of the lockdown period and the starting in school, have utilised some of our SENCOM resources as well for our vulnerable visually impaired youngsters and HI hearing impaired youngsters, as well as youngsters with speech and learning difficulties. For example, we had a young lad who was blind within a school, and actually a SENCOM member of staff offered to come to support him on a one-to-one basis to reintegrate him back into the school. So we've looked at bespoke packages for individuals that have quite complex ALL needs. So that's another piece of work we've been doing. The other piece of work we've been doing is looking at the counselling service as well for our vulnerable youngsters. The counselling service was expanded. We had additional funding from Welsh Government to expand the secondary provision for counselling. And obviously, because of the COVID situation, all counselling services had to move online. So additional conversations have been had with counselling leads at both secondary and primary sector to see how that could work. We also had additional funding from Welsh Government through at the end of the summer term to expand the counselling service to our primary sectors, primary youngsters, and also to families. So we're now in a position where counselling is offered for blocks of periods to families, for youngsters in primary school, looking at art and music therapy. Therapy boxes have been provided for schools as well, and also the online and bespoke packages now for secondary schools, because some secondary youngsters didn't like the online counselling provision. They wanted a mixed package, so they wanted some face-to-face that we can do in a safe environment, as well as the online sessions. All through the lockdown period, through the summer and through this term, our special educational needs panel has continued, and we've had on average 25 to 30 cases of ALN youngsters discussed on a weekly basis to ensure that we've got the right support and advice in place for those families and for those young people. We had an increase of formal assessment requests for young people through the lockdown period. So obviously schools were having more time to look at their complex young people and put formal assessment requests, which were either agreed with SEN panel or advice given back to the schools. The educational psychologists throughout the period were also available to school staff to help support and give advice for the families and young people throughout. but they were also involved in the formal assessment of certain ALN youngsters to understand and assess their individual needs to ensure the right level of support could be put in place for them. Obviously, because of lockdown, the EPs, the educational psychologists, were unable to observe the young people within schools. However, we've explored opportunities for online assessments that the young people can access. So the EP was observing the young person with either a member of staff or their family at home. Since September, risk assessments in place now. The educational psychologists are back on school site to review some of those assessments to make sure we've got the appropriate provision for our young people. We also, over the period of the summer term, look to expand our ASD provision within Newport, because our autism youngsters is a growing need within the city. So we opened up a specialist ASD base at one of our primary schools, and through the lockdown period the staff were able to access specialist training, so they could open at the start of September, and we invited the youngsters to attend straight away, and that's been very successful, bringing them back into school. We also have had, through a Welsh Government grant, the opportunity to provide autism outreach from Ysgol Brynderw to support our vulnerable autistic youngsters in mainstream to access their learning. So that has been launched just before half term and it's been very well received by our school, so that's being developed further. We're in constant contact with our head teachers. We have a working group looking at healthcare plans at the moment, looking at our complex healthcare needs for our youngsters to ensure they're also able to access their learning within schools. And as I say, we have constant dialogue with our head teachers to try to look at solutions for any issues to make sure that our ALN youngsters have no barriers to access the learning that's required of them. Are there any questions around? I've covered quite a lot of things there, so apologies, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
If I may just come in there quickly, there are 2 or 3 things that arise from your report there. Are we sure that sufficient equipment has been handed out across the piece, not just to ALN learners? And could you give us a little update on how, within this situation, the Bridge Street service is being delivered? Plus, I have some concerns around children who are being homeschooled. Now, how are you supporting children who are being homeschooled, and who is responsible for monitoring their progress? And I will come back to you, I promise, Councillor Lacey.
Okay, Councillor Watkins, the first question was around equipment.
Yes.
For pupils. There is no, I cannot give you a secure answer to say that equipment is out there for everybody. That's important for schools to be able to provide that to their own school communities. I can give you some headlines which are important in terms of, we know the amount of pupils that are digitally excluded, and we know that there is a shortfall in laptops, etc. We've done our very best to be able to bridge that gap by ensuring that schools are loaning out their equipment themselves. So that happened during the lockdown period. We were able to give approximately 800 laptops to the school community that were reconditioned. We were able to give nearly 3,000 MiFi units out to pupils that didn't have access to the internet, and that continues even in autumn term, should they need that for their learning, to complement their learning in school, and if they're in a period of self-isolation, for instance. And we have a large order of additional laptops, Chromebooks, etc. that has been made by the local authority, but as all local authorities, we're all in the same position, that those orders are stuck in China. And they won't come to any local authority until January at least, and that is down to, you know, the world pandemic. what we have done is we've had dialogue with schools to make sure where there's shortfall in digital technology, for instance, if a child is participating in distance learning, that they have access to resource packs which are handed out in a safe manner. And schools assure us of that, but I couldn't give you, the ultimate answer is every single child catered for.
Sarah, you've clearly made a lot of progress and a lot of effort, but I think the concern is that there may be still some children out there who, haven't had the benefit of a laptop or the other measures. And I think that is something that, you need to monitor very carefully, because we need to be there for every child.
We will continue to do that, what Councillor Ox, we must monitor, we must know those children that haven't got that equipment. Yeah. Unfortunately, we continue to, for instance, liaise with private businesses who can support us by donating stock that they have. But we've done everything we possibly can. We're looking for other creative ideas if anybody can support us, but we feel we can't overcome this problem, and this is a national issue, isn't it?
It is. And homeschool children?
Homeschool children. Andrew will support with this answer as well. But what I would say is, over this period of time, I would suggest that with some families who have high anxiety and haven't returned to school, they have suggested they'd like to homeschool. And what we've done as a team is we've made sure they fully understand the differences between not coming to school during a pandemic, which is one separate issue, and electively home educating. Okay, so it is very different, because if you choose to electively home educate, you lose your place for school forever unless you reapply. If you electively home educate, you wouldn't have distance and blended learning offered to you. That's the parent's responsibility to take on that education for the child. So when we've had this correspondence from parents, we haven't been satisfied with just the letter and the request. We wanted to make sure that every parent fully understands the implications. And obviously that's not to be patronising in any way, but I wouldn't want anybody to be to not know the full implications, because they might think they can go back to their old school. And if you're electively home education, you come off the register. Now, for a child that is not coming to school over a period of time, the trade unions of the workforce and the professional teachers would say that actually you should only provide distance learning for a short period of time. And you're looking at the space of a week, because they can't do everything. You can't be in the classroom teaching and be providing everything else as well. So that is the family's choice for those children not to come to school. Some schools, individuals, have decided they want to support a little bit more, and they want, in the best interest of families, they've tried to support with the blended learning for a longer period of time, while, for instance, parents might be have immunity, have problems, health related problems, and are frightened for children to go to school because of the pandemic. But actually it's not an entitlement for a long period of time. A short period of time, like self-isolation or a circuit break, then you would be expected to provide blended learning and distance learning, but not for an indefinite period. But overall, the education welfare officers would do a welfare check on children that are both electively home educated, so that would happen on an annual basis, or if they were just absent from school for a long period of time, they would continue to do those check-ins with the school, because ultimately, if a child is absent from school and still on the school's attendance list, but they're not coming, the school is ultimately responsible for that pupil.
Sarah, are you saying that the EWOs would only make an annual check?
Yeah, for what? So as it stands,
so the quality of their learning is not really being monitored.
It would be monitored through the ALN team. So through Katie's team, she has a couple of teacher advisors that can support with the quality of learning as well. If there was a statement, the SEN team would be checking on the statement provision within the household, but actually that's where elective home education stands on a national basis. That is the minimum requirement and what you'd expect. Local authorities not resourced to be able to support with doing those home learning checks as it stands. And that's what the parent takes on as their responsibility. They are responsible for their own children's education if they electively home educate.
Okay, thank you for that. And the last thing there was the Bridge Street Centre.
Can I pass over to Katie?
Of course.
Yes, we had a very successful engagement actually with the Bridge Achievement Centre youngsters. They developed Google Classrooms at the start of the year before lockdown, so that they were equipped then. So when lockdown happened, and I agree that a lot of the youngsters in the Bridge Achievement Centre do not have IT equipment, but what equipment was available was shared with the young people to access the Google Classrooms. If they didn't have IT equipment, paper copies of all the work were hand delivered to the homes of the young people, so they had sight of the young people, could check up on them and collect work, drop off work as well. Free school meal vouchers were also dropped off to the homes as well, so that they could monitor how they were doing. And since returning to the Bridge Achievement Centre, we obviously have issues because Bridge Achievement Centre also covers the medical tuition pupils. So some of our medical youngsters are deemed not too vulnerable to access, or the parents don't want them to come back onto site at the moment. But we have got a small group facility that the majority of our tuition pupils are accessing as well. We've got youngsters back on the main sites. So everything seems to be going okay. We've got the contacts in place. Welsh Government have asked the Bridge Achievement Centre to write a case study on the IT provision that they gave to their youngsters because they were very impressed with the work that they'd established. And one of the members who are leading that on the Bridge Achievement Centre has been given a presentation to other colleagues on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's back to you, Councillor Lacey. I'm sorry to have intervened there, but my thoughts came as a result of that presentation.
No, nothing really. Just to commend the work that's actually being done when you hear that, in-depth reply. So it's great to know that our children are, where possible, being looked after with their education in such a bizarre time that we're all in. I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lacey. One more thing, you mentioned this survey regarding the plan for blended learning. Do you think we could be provided with a copy of that plan, please, Sarah? What's available?
Councillor Watkins, I'll be able to provide you with a headline report. That will be fine.
Thank you very much. Now I have Councillor Yvonne Forsey. Please go ahead with your question, Councillor Forsey.
Thank you, Chair. We're likely to see an increase in the number of pupils applying for free school meals in the coming months. And I wonder what you could can you tell me what is being done to monitor this process and make it easy for parents to navigate?
Well, what we do is we've got a direct communication with the benefits team in Newport City Council, so that if any parent is in receipt of any type of benefit, they're automatically prompted to apply for free school meals, so that it should be seamless. So you as a parent, you wouldn't even have to think of it yourself, because somebody will tell you you're entitled to that. So therefore, we would like to encourage you. It's a benefit to us if everybody makes a claim for their free school meals, because it demonstrates the full picture of deprivation across the city. It's important.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear that is that parents are prompted and that's an easy process. Can I follow up with a different question, please, Chair?
Please feel free.
Thank you. We've got action number 5. It says ensure all secondary schools are aware of the serious and organised crime initiatives. and we've got an end date of the 31st of July 2022. I think this seems rather a long time in the future, and I wonder if this could be speeded up a bit, because it seems like a very important target, and I think we've got an achievement of 14% so far, but yeah, that's my question. Can something be done to speed this up?
So it's not that schools don't understand the nature of serious and organised crime, because head teachers have had briefings about serious and organised crime and specific elements, for instance, cuckooing, etc., and important things to be aware of. They're also aware through a process which is aligned to children's services, where if there is a specific incident of a police investigation, schools are notified, because they need to be sensitive in responding to children within their school. So it's not that schools are not fully aware. This is about a specific pilot project which is starting off in Glamwern as a cluster, and we are very lucky to have this project within Gwent. And until this project is deemed to be working efficiently, it wouldn't be rolled out to other schools across the city or across Gwent at all. So Katie's the lead for that project in Newport. Katie, is there anything else you need to say?
Yeah, you're right, Sarah. It is basically around this pilot and engaging schools on the journey and feeding back to head teachers and school representatives throughout the next 2 years. But basically, it's about a multi-agency approach to support vulnerable youngsters and try to catch them before they get immersed in criminal exploitation. So it's looking at how we can identify young people at an earlier stage, and then track them through and look at a holistic package of support to the families and that young person to prevent them going down the wrong route in the future. And it was based on research that we've done over the last 12 to 18 months around 13 young people who were already in the criminal system. And we looked at case studies and searched back from all service areas to see, was there a point in time that we could have tried to capture these young people before they went down that route. So all the agencies are involved with that, and we're in the process now of reviewing those recommendations and shaping the operational group, because we've identified some youngsters within the Llanwern area that possibly we need to monitor and look at support that is in place. So we're shaping the operational groups as we speak. So it is a long-term project, and if we can get it's to inform new ways of working really for our service delivery across social services, police, health, to make sure that we're joined up, because a lot of the young people in the cases that we looked at last year demonstrated that they'd access, the families and the young person had accessed lots of different support, but it was almost on a timeline and it wasn't holistically around that child and that family at one point in time, which we from the research looked like that would be a good opportunity to have a better impact on that young person and family.
Thank you. Because it's not just in that area that you know, work is needed. Work is needed across all of Newport, isn't it? And I would say I think this is a very important piece of work. So thank you.
Yeah. And the idea would be, if we can get a success and shape our offer of support, we would look to roll it out then across Newport, but we needed to pilot it somewhere to help shape our service delivery. So I agree with you totally. It's a huge issue and we really need to be proactive looking at it.
Thank you very much for your update. I need to speak to you, Neil, because I can vaguely see someone has their hand up, but I can't see who it is. So
It's
what?
Councillor Cleverly, Chair.
Right. Well, can you ensure that I can see who is wanting to ask a question? So if it's Councillor Cleverly, please, Councillor Cleverly, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the announcement that the WAG made from Kirsty Williams about the GCSEs and the A levels being postponed until next year. Is there a plan in place for schools in Newport?
Yesterday we met with WJC actually to talk about it, and there are plans underway, but nothing to tell at the moment. So what I can tell you is it's out of Newport's hands. Obviously, this is a national issue, and this will be directed by Qualifications Wales. Okay, and what they've asked for is a head teachers working group to advise them on the next steps. So this is my view now, and what I would expect to happen. I would imagine that we'll know what the teacher assessment will look like for GCSEs, A levels and AS levels around the first week in January, so that there'll need to be associated professional workforce training to be able to implement those assessments within the classroom. Our EAS School Improvement Service I'm sure will be able to support with that professional learning. You know, we will need to consider all types of things. So, for instance, to make sure that it is a fair and consistent process. And obviously, we operate assessments in lots of different ways, because previously we've had coursework that's happened in classrooms that's been live. We've also been part of a national literacy and numeracy assessment process, which has gone on. So the education workforce is well versed in operating such procedures, but obviously it's going to be subject specific as well. So we don't know how many assessments will take place per subject, how long they will last, whether there'll be a specific time frame for them to work with. You know, would it be a month that you'll have to complete the assessment with a group of young learners? That will all learners have to participate in the assessment at the same time within a school? So there's lots of questions that we would raise nationally, but until that small group of professionals and Qualifications Wales work together, we won't know the answers, but these are the things we're all thinking at the moment.
Well, hopefully they decide soon, because the young people are really stressed about this. You know, and I know my granddaughter's supposed to take her A levels, and all the ones in her class, you know, they're quite stressed about it. But thank you, Sarah, for that.
That's okay.
I would agree with you, Councillor Cleverly. I have a grandson who's doing GCSEs, and the schools are giving out some information, and it is proving rather confusing and rather stressful. So, you know, the sooner these kids are able to know the facts, the better. And can I respectfully remind all councillors, please, when you are not speaking or asking a question, put your camera and your voice off, please. Now then, can I see any more hands up? No.
Councillor Trevor Watkins, please, Chair.
It's not coming up on my screen, Neil. Neil?
Not sure why. I'll be able to advise you who's next, Chair.
Thank you. So who's next on the list, please?
It's Councillor Trevor Watkins.
Right, Councillor Watkins, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It's reference the COVID recovery plan. The outcomes in regards to the service plan as well. It's nice to see the majority of them in green, but do you think the outcomes are challenging enough because they're nearly all green? And the second question is, in regards to the second half of the year, do you see any major issues in regards to the budget and the service plan towards the end of the year by not meeting the outcomes which you've set out?
I think, Councillor Watkins, in terms of the challenge of the plan, we had quite minor adjustments to make. We've really gone with a business as usual approach. The reason we've gone with that is because if we lack pace in the work that we do, it will hold up future years. So we've had to really continue with everything that we intend to do, and we intend to do in our long-term strategy. I think actually it's not that the green doesn't indicate that it's not challenging enough. I would just say that it's hats off to officers in education services, because they've worked tirelessly during the pandemic, despite, for instance, there was teams that had young children at home that might have experienced sickness, bereavement, etc., from all the usual pandemic issues, and they were relentless in the work that they carried out. I think whilst there's been some really challenging issues around the pandemic, what we know now is whilst we're working in an agile fashion, so we're working from home, we're working very long days. We did from March the 23rd. We were all able to work through our digital devices. We were well prepared for that. And actually, it's maximised our time. So what we don't find ourselves doing at the moment is travelling on long journeys to attend meetings. We've had excellent success with the turnout in meetings. So a good example is where chairs of governors have met with our EAS colleagues and we've attended. Previously, we might have had potentially 50% turnout. We've had 100% turnout, and that's been replicated in every meeting that we've attended. So business can be conducted in a pacey fashion. We can get the maximum out of it, and there is very little downtime. Now, with that, of course, that means that we have to make sure that we are considering the well-being of officers that are working through this plan as well, because it can be difficult. It has its own challenges, but the green nature of the mid-service plan is not because it's not challenging enough, it's because people have absolutely worked tirelessly to make sure that it's green. There are a couple of red issues. Andrew, can you comment on a couple of the reds for us, please?
Sure. So the red issues relate to school finances. So there's two elements. It's the secondary schools in it's a standalone issue, and the amber measure is to do with the overall school budgets. So secondary school finances have been a concern for a while, and over the course of the last year we've had 5 independent reviews carried out of secondary schools with significant deficits. That's been completed by internal teams where it was the business improvement team, HR and finance. Plus it was also supplemented by an independent education expert who looked at school structures and curriculum delivery with a focus on the value for money. So 5 individual reports were written, have been shared with the chairs of governors and the head teachers. It was a mixture. Some schools, it was felt they were completely addressing all aspects appropriately and there was no significant recommendations or changes that were needed. However, they still had financial difficulties. There were others where actually there was recommendations to review their teaching and learning responsibilities. So this is additional payments awarded to individual staff members, to review their leadership structure. It's things like looking at the number of hours that schools, teachers teach over a fortnight. So in a small number of cases, there were recommendations to address, but it's a larger issue around the school finances.
Andrew, may I just come in there? And thank you, Trevor. That's a really good question.
Well, the second half question.
Can I just ask how many schools, both secondary and primary, are in debt? How many schools, both secondary and primary, are at risk of becoming in debt? Please.
I can't give you that as a specific answer right now. I'd have to get the full details from finance. Sarah, do you want to comment?
Hang on. I believe that there are 8 schools in deficit at the moment.
Primary or secondary?
There would be 5 secondary schools in deficit positions, 3 primary.
Thank you.
However, I did want to make sure that you knew as a caveat is that whilst deficit might remain in those secondary schools and the primary schools, many have resolved their in-year deficits, which means that they're not accumulating further debt. So, for instance, they've taken on recommendations through the local authority to make changes and save money in the future.
And how many schools are at risk of falling into deficit?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer in a factual way, because there are ways of looking at it. I don't think you can give a definitive answer. Okay. If a school has a balanced budget, okay, so if it's in surplus, then that is satisfactory through one means. You could have a school which, for instance, has a surplus budget but is spending more annually than there is income. So they've got a in-year deficit on an annual basis. And there's a couple of ways of looking at that. First of all, you wouldn't want a school to go into a deficit position. So you would expect them to curb their spending in order for them not to go into a deficit position. That's our expectation. We do not wish schools to go into deficit, and we really won't. If it's actually me that signs it off, I would say that I wouldn't allow it. But some schools, for instance, might have, they might be in a very fortunate position. So say, for instance, they've got a £90,000 surplus budget, which is a lot. It's probably over their 5% threshold. They might, for instance, have a member of staff employed that's doing reading recovery to support learners. Now, whilst they can afford it, they're living off their savings, aren't they? And there is nothing wrong with continuing to employ that member of staff while they can afford it. But ultimately, they will get to a point where they can't afford it. So we understand that schools might be overspending in terms of their income, and they might be living off their savings, and that's their choice as long as they recognise that they can't continue with that spending when the money is not there.
So now the second question that Councillor Trevor Watkins asked, can you answer that?
Sorry, Councillor Watkins, I've forgotten what that was.
I thought you might have. It referenced the second half of the year.
Right.
Do you see any major challenges?
I'm very sorry. Can I?
Sorry, we seem to have got a glitch here. Trevor, carry on and ask. I think that might be Councillor Thomas. Can you please mute yourself for the moment and allow Councillor Watkins to ask his question and Sarah to respond, please?
Chair, Councillor Giles, I'm very sorry. You'll be aware I have to pick up, it seems. So if you forgive me, I need to go to the cabinet meeting, if that's okay.
Well, we can't change that at this stage, can we, Councillor? But
No.
it is disappointing that you are unable to remain for the rest of the meeting, and I would hope that perhaps on a subsequent occasion those meeting clashes might be dealt with more appropriately. But thank you.
Yeah. Okay, now obviously it's not something I've arranged, but I certainly hope it doesn't clash again next time. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Watkins, carry on, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It's referenced the COVID recovery plan and the service plan. Over the second half of the year, do you see any major challenges that could affect the budget and the service plan which has been set out?
In terms of the service plan actions, I would envisage that they will all be green by the end of the year. I don't see any major obstacles at the moment, so I'm confident that the actions can be green. In terms of the risks with finances, etc., this is all down to Welsh Government funding and the decisions that Cabinet themselves make. So I can't give you a precise answer on what that might look like until we go through the budget process. So I am sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Neil, I cannot see any hands raised here, so is someone else wishing to raise a question?
Isn't Councillor Townsend, please, Chair?
Thank you. Councillor Townsend, please go ahead.
Yeah, Sarah, it's just a short question actually about schools deficit. You talk about schools possibly overspending or using savings and saying that this can't continue if the money's not there. Every school that I know, and admittedly it's not every school in Newport, but certainly the little nursery where I'm a governor, the staff and the organisation of the nursery are bending over backwards to save money. I mean, it's not as though schools are on, you know, a big jolly spending money left, right and centre. So what happens when schools do fall into this position?
I think you're quite right, Councillor Townsend, in saying that schools are bending over backwards. But we have to look at a strong evidence base as well, okay? And we've got 57 schools in our system in Newport. And so what we've done to date with secondary schools, for instance, is we've done 5 independent reviews to assess the breadth of their curriculum, to look at their staffing, to look at their sickness levels. And what you'll find with these reports is that you can often see that sickness levels are really high in some settings. You'd expect that, wouldn't you, when you look at a variety of organisations?
Yeah.
Now, what that would say to us is that often supply costs are really expensive. And when you're looking at the difference between one school which might have a £20,000 supply cost and one school which has got a £200,000 supply costs, you can see how sickness absence would need to be addressed in a meaningful way. That can give some ambiguous information as well, because the cover cost, the supply cover cost, often relates to professional learning, which is an important element, because unless the workforce has professional learning, then they're not doing their learners justice. So we're not looking at it with just a single focus and not understanding the context. We do look at the context of the school as well, but we have these benchmark indicators to help us raise the right questions and to challenge appropriately or to support appropriately. But you are going to get differences with 57 settings. Another example is we'll be able to see who's more generously staffed. So you might see from one school, there is a tiny senior leadership team, whilst you'll see in another school, it has an extensive leadership scheme. So we're trying to create some type of equity and fairness as well in the system, and to consider where schools, giving them some ideas and some pointers for where they should be saving money. So undoubtedly, you know, everybody's trying their best with the austerity that we face, but there are some examples where we know, and it's our duty to make sure that we're looking at those, because this is public money. So that's what we are doing.
Thank you, Sarah. But essentially, it will lead to redundancies among teaching staff down the road, won't it?
It could do. I mean, there are other ways of saving monies as well. But when you look at contracts and commissioning, the contracts that large secondary schools operate are huge. So whether they're cleaning, ground maintenance, they could be catering contracts they've taken on independently and would be better suited to be part of the local authority contract. There are large amounts of goods, supplies and services which could be saved. So it isn't just staff, but ultimately it is with regret that we would see the loss of staff. But where any business or organisation is overstaffed and needs to make the appropriate savings, we have to present value for money in the system as well.
Yeah, okay, Sarah, thank you.
Can I just say I'm really sorry that the cabinet member has left the meeting at this point, because you've mentioned fairness and equity, Sarah. Now, is it the case, as I understand it, that Newport may be the worst funded school for education in the whole of Wales?
I don't believe that, Councillor Watkins. I think that it's ambiguous benchmarking data which is out of date and presented by Welsh Government and doesn't marry up with the rest of the performance indicators for Wales. That's my professional view. I think that it's very much skewed, and I think that it's skewed based on the way that local authorities each delegate their funding. And so when you unearth all of those individual local authorities, you might find that Newport isn't as disadvantaged as those tables attempt to show. I think that they're just completely out of date.
Well, perhaps we ought to look at getting one that is in date. However, Neil, are there any other hands raised, please?
No more hands, Chair.
Right, can I ask the question then in terms of the pressure on school places at secondary level? I understand there is substantial pressure, and what is the action plan and the mitigation with regard to this situation?
Councillor Watkins, we have a planning of school places group that works consistently to address this. This is headed up by Deb Weston, who's our service manager for resources in 21st schools. I'm going to pass to Deb to give you that full answer.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Just to reassure you, there are sufficient secondary school places across the city. However, they might not be in the place where there is most parental demand. And also they might not be in the language medium that is of most parental demand. So I would just want to reassure you that we do have sufficient secondary school places, albeit there are differences in demand across the city for those places. Notwithstanding that, we have been, you will be aware, when I joined the call, I heard that you were having a conversation about the proposed investment in Basleg School. So you will be aware that there is a consultation which ended last Thursday that serves to increase the pupil population of Basleg by 300 pupil places. Yes. So we are closely monitoring, and that is the area of most demand. So just to reiterate that obviously we've had this issue at the moment where the places are not in the area of demand. This will solve that problem, and then there will be sufficient places for pupils within that area of high demand. Now that doesn't say that the problem will be eradicated totally, and we are continuing to monitor that on a termly basis, as Sarah said, through the Planning of School Places group. What we've done recently is identify that whilst there is obviously you'll all be aware that there has been a pressure on primary school places over the last few years, hence we put a couple of bubble classes in different schools, and it was inevitable that that was going to manifest itself in the secondary sector as those cohorts move throughout their school life. The latest projections indicate that the blip, as we are talking about it, will not manifest itself as early as we previously anticipated. So it's still going to happen, but the demand is less than we'd originally anticipated that it would be. But that's not to say that we're not thinking about what the future holds in terms of secondary provision, and we're continuing to model that and model options for future secondary places. The idea at the moment is that would likely form part, the additional secondary school places we are likely to need would probably form a large proportion of our Band C proposals under 21st century schools, which will come into place from 2024 onwards.
I raise this issue because I know in my own ward we have potentially 280 new properties that may be given planning permission, and that will put a pressure on an already pressurized school. So I think it is something that, you know, is of considerable importance.
Absolutely, and we are working with, we've been working with the planning department this week to look at the Section 106 agreement that's associated with our site, just to make sure that education does get a contribution from that for future secondary school provision in that area. So I just want to reassure you that we're constantly working cross departments to make sure that we get the best benefit for our schools, both primary and secondary sector. Obviously, you'll also be aware from your ward perspective that we have changed the catchment area for that school as well, and that will take effect from next September. And that's not to say that pupils who now find themselves out of catchment can't still apply and can't still be offered a place, but the size of the catchment area has been reduced to be only applicable to children who live in Newport.
I do know that. I do understand. Are there any other hands raised, please, Neil?
No other hands, Chair.
Right. So, I'd really like to raise a question then, if there are no other hands raised. What is being done to support the mental health of children and staff who have all been put under so much pressure throughout this pandemic?
Okay, so I think if I start off with the staff aspect, Care First is running for all of our education workforce throughout the local authority and is available to discuss any COVID issues as well as a large range of issues that are related to mental health and well-being aspects. So, for instance, our own workforce might be in a position where they've experienced financial problems because a partner might have lost their job. So you can access even financial support through the Care First mechanism. So it really does look at everything. Occupational health still continues despite the lockdown. So we've been able to operate team meetings with occupational health advisors for any members of staff that are anxious or are off with work-related stress. So that's been enormously helpful. The National Academy for Leadership is providing bespoke support for head teachers that find themselves in a unique position. So that's additional support that's been happening in light of COVID. I think on a local basis, obviously our direct contact is with leaders in schools, and what we've done is we've made sure as our own senior leadership team that we've made ourselves available throughout this. So that means that we've been on duty evenings and weekends for any head teacher that needs to discuss predominantly COVID issues, because that's what's caused a lot of the anxiety in terms of staffing a school appropriately, closing a year group, for instance. We've been on hand to answer those questions. What we've also done on a local basis is made sure that we've met with a large group of head teacher representatives on either a weekly, fortnightly or once a month basis, depending on the needs. So we've got 3 secondary head teacher reps, 1 special school head teacher rep, and 4 primary head teacher reps that meets with the senior leadership team to discuss all types of issues that are might cause bother in schools. So the subgroups that are operating are PPE. That was really essential when we were in the lockdown period because PPE was in such short supply and was needed for our special schools. Obviously, it resurfaced then in terms of face coverings, which came into being for over 11s and for staff. We've got a school transport subgroup. We've got a cleaning and catering subgroup, a health and safety, and we also look at curriculum issues as well. So basically what we've done is where a problem has arisen, we've solved it quickly and it's resolved, which is supported, I would suggest, with head teacher anxiety. That's trickled down the confidence of their leadership with the education workforce across the city, I would suggest. Our school staff have been absolutely incredible. The teaching assistants, the teachers, the head teachers, their ambition for learners and for well-being has been incredible. So it's been important that we look after theirs as well and we support them. But obviously that's not going to answer everything, but it's one element which has been critical to this process. So that describes the education workforce care and support. But I'm going to pass over to Katie because I think what's been done in terms of learner well-being and emotional health has been incredible, and we're really proud of that. So Katie, can I ask you just to recap on those things? I know you mentioned some things earlier.
Yes, we've been fortunate that we had funding from Welsh Government, as I mentioned earlier, to expand the counselling service. So there's drop-in online video and chats available for young people. There's community counselling. With the primary sector, we've got teleplay therapy for 6 to 11-year-olds. We've got virtual counselling through videos or telephones, depending on the needs of the young person. We've also got those parent consultations and counselling service. With regard to the schools, as I mentioned earlier, we've commissioned now the whole school approach team, who have been working with head teachers, senior leaders to look at bespoke training and interventions based on the needs of their own youngsters within their schools and within their clusters. So they're having meetings through this autumn term to discuss the issues and put the bespoke planning and training in place. We've also had ELSA support, emotional literacy support assistants. So they are trained teaching assistants who have accessed a training course with us, and they have regular consultations with educational psychologists to ensure they're problem solving with youngsters. And the ELSAs provide bespoke support for identified youngsters within each school, so based on needs. So it could be if they've experienced bereavement, if they've got anger issues, if they find it difficult to transition back into schools. So the ELSAs in the schools will be able to support those young people. So we're looking at individual support as well as holistic support throughout the school, try to get the ethos of the school focused on the well-being needs of the young people. We've also got the educational psychologists running clinics with each of the schools about the needs of individual youngsters. So school staff are able to meet with the educational psychologist and discuss youngsters that they're concerned about anonymously and get advice as soon as possible. And as Sarah mentioned, we are on a hotline basically with school staff for any support that's needed, and we've got our teacher advisor and our inclusion officer as well who are supporting schools. We've also seen around this time obviously a reduction completely of exclusions because of the support that the schools are putting in place for the young people. Is very much the support is based on relationship building with the young people and smaller groups to ensure that the youngsters feel safe and supported. So we've been advising schools on how to set up that closer contact and relationship building to support the young people's well-being.
Thank you. It certainly sounds as though you've got a lot of measures in place, and thank you for that. And it's also really good to hear that exclusions have been reduced as a result of the work that's being done. Now I need to ask you again, Neil, because I can't see. Are there any other hands raised, please?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Cleverly, please.
Right, Councillor Cleverly, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question as such. This is just, I'd like to thank Sarah and the rest of your team and all the schools, because I know after being on the governors and speaking to the head of the Welsh school by me, they do go over their job description. Do you know, they're even directing the traffic when the school ends at 3 o'clock, you know, and that is not in their job description, which they've been absolutely marvellous. So my thanks to them all.
They've been amazing, Councillor Cleverly. You know, the hours they're working in schools is just incredible.
I do think those of us who are school governors are very aware of what the extra effort has been put in, and what an absolute strain it's put on the people making that extra effort. And I would say that probably everybody on this committee would like to have our thanks extended to all school staff in whatever capacity, and also to officers within your department, whatever their capacity, for the work and the extra commitment that they've shown.
Thank
you. Pass that on, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Any more hands raised, please, Neil?
Councillor Forsey, please, Chair.
Right, Councillor Forsey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask who specified the size of a bubble in a school, because some schools seem to have quite small bubbles and some schools seem to have extremely large bubbles, and obviously if a child is got a positive test, then it can mean a very large number of pupils have to self-isolate as well.
It's the schools themselves that specify the size of the bubbles. Traditionally, what you'll see is primary schools are able to maintain a class size bubble, and children will stay in their classes all day long. With you might be able to pop out. It's manageable when you've got a 1 to 3 form entry school to be able to pop out for a break time. It'll be timetable, so it does give pupils the ability to go out and have some fresh air, but that means but largely you would have to stay in your classroom all day long. In secondary schools, I have to support our secondary schools that they have got the year groups as the contact groups, but that enables them to give specialist teaching, so they're trying to maximise their face-to-face learning opportunities and have the specialist teachers in front of those learners. They're able to provide some type of break time and lunch for for those young people to be able to access. It's very difficult for any set of children or young people to spend all day in a classroom, but it becomes really complex when you're working in a secondary school. So what you're looking at is it's between 40 and 50 form groups in a secondary school, even more with your sixth forms. And so to try and enable young people to stay within one contact group of 30 in a classroom is nigh impossible. Welsh Government asked us to determine the contact groups and say that it's absolutely legitimate for a year group to be a contact group. But it is a double-edged sword, because what we do find, obviously, is that track and trace team would advise us, and we have to follow the TTP process, for young people to go into a self-isolation period if one student within a year group is tested as positive. But they do, when pupils are in school, they do get to have a broad and balanced curriculum with specialist teaching. And ultimately, without the specialist teaching and the setting of pupils, it would risk GCSE, AS and A-level outcomes. So I think everybody is absolutely doing their best. It's not come without some noise from specific groups of parents, but I would support our secondary schools. They're doing the best they can with the risk assessments they have to put into place and with the learning that they're trying to maximise with.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Neil, are there any other hands raised, please?
Councillor Townsend, please, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend, please go ahead.
Yes, it's a follow-on basically from what Councillor Forsey has just said. I mentioned it before the meeting that a lady from a parent at Basleg School contacted us all back in November. Sarah, you may have also been contacted. Her child is in year 8 and she's anxious that, the mother is anxious that the COVID policy is changed in Newport. She said the child was starting another 2 weeks of isolation because one child tested positive, so the whole year of 300 children had to self-isolate for 2 weeks. This was just before half term, so over 5 weeks these children had to isolate for, over this period they had to isolate for 5 weeks. It has a huge impact on mental health, on the pupils and their families. She thinks neighbouring councils don't take this approach and wants Newport to look at the alternatives and try and consider a different approach to sorry, I'm taking shorthand notes here, to drive a review within Newport to look at other councils in Wales and England and adopt an approach that's based on best practice. Sorry, Sarah, that does sound a bit long-winded. You may have heard it, but I do worry about secondary school pupils, particularly because of the size of the school. My next to youngest daughter is head of music in Bath, and she has seen a dramatic increase in mental health issues in children, obesity problems during the 6 months that they were off school. They no longer move around the school, the teacher moves to them. And the year 7 children she describes as quite out of control because they have no interaction with older year groups, so they don't come in contact with sixth formers, and teachers, not only her, but teachers are reporting that to me because I know a lot of teachers, and I just think we need to sort of get a grip of it, because we're not actually talking about the plague where people are falling dead in the street. You know, I think children are the least affected in this pandemic than anybody.
But yet we still have to follow the TTP advice. So it doesn't matter whether it's a plague where people are dropping dead or it is COVID.
What's TTP?
It is the Track, Trace and Protect team. So the environmental health experts are telling us, and they're right. I support them. That they.
But Sarah, they're not necessarily right though, because there are doctors who are not given airtime, who do not agree with wearing face masks. No child should have a face mask on.
I couldn't get involved in those discussions about what's right and what's wrong in terms of of medical advice. I'm not that within that profession, and so I'm not going to comment on.
Following it, Sarah, and
we're following Welsh Government guidance.
I know, but is anybody saying, are these the right things to do for the young children? It's ruining their mental health.
Can I just come in there?
Yes, you can, Jane.
Carmel, I understand your concerns, as I'm sure Sarah does, but these are not questions that Sarah can have the answers to. So, you know, I think perhaps your question should be directed at the Welsh Government, who have put these guidelines in place that we currently do all have to follow. Is that okay, Carmel?
It is. What do we tell this lady in Baselack then?
I don't want to be disrespectful, but I do understand that, you know, these are not questions that Sarah can answer. In terms of the lady in, yes, you might have an answer for that, Sarah. The lady.
I think that the schools make their own decisions, but I am clearly saying that I support schools with their decisions, but it is within their gift on how they design their contact groups with their governing bodies. But when you mention best practice, there is no best practice that's being shared across Wales. Maybe that's something you could write to Kirsty Williams about to enable her to share some best practice. I meet with all Wales directors of education on a fortnightly basis. That doesn't exist. And whilst there might be an assumption that is good practice, what I can't speak for is that in a neighbouring authority, I don't know if the risk assessment is legitimate, that it's been looked at by the health and safety team, that it's been signed off by the chair of governors, that it's appropriate. I can only speak for the schools within our own local authority, and I know that they've been observed by the health and safety team, that they're following the TTP processes, that they're providing a broad and balanced curriculum, they're maximising face-to-face learning rather. So I know those facts, and I can only be responsible and look at those, but ultimately it is the school's decision. And I've spoken to schools individually, and they've told me we're trying to review and learn because we don't want whole year groups to be off. But we've tried all ways, and there's nothing we can do to improve the system. So I trust them, and they know the operational details of what they're doing. So there has to be, I have to respect their professional opinion, and I have got an insight into it through the health and safety team as well. But I would also say is that across Newport, we average where we've got approximately 370 year groups across the schools. And this week, we've got approximately 16 that are in self-isolation. It's been unfortunate where there's been really unlucky schools that have experienced 2 episodes of self-isolation over a fortnight twice. But they are only on one hand that I can count them. So it's really unlucky, and there is that risk of it happening again. But what I can't do is I can't control the pandemic and the way that it moves, and we're doing our very best, I can assure you that. But if elected members want to work with governing bodies, because they're all represented on governing bodies, they might want to discuss ideas with them directly. But our head teachers are saying whilst they're doing their very best, they can't seem to get over that obstacle of the larger contact groups.
Okay, Sarah.
Thank you. Neil, are there any other hands raised, please?
No more hands, Chair.
No more hands. Right. Can I just pick up on one or two very small things? I noticed that there are some policies that should have been implemented in October or in the autumn. So can I ask, the protocol for self-harm and suicide, is that now implemented? It was due in October. And what progress is there on safeguard training for staff? Can you give me the answers on those 2 issues, please?
Sure.
Oh, and there's also a policy on weapons, and that was due to be implemented in autumn 2020.
Okay, so Katie will give you an answer on the weapons policy and the self-harm and suicide, and Andrew will give you an update on the safeguarding. Okay, Councillor Watkins.
Thank you.
With regards to the weapons policy, we're waiting for feedback from a different team in the police. So the youth offending team are chasing that for their feedback on it, because we just want to make sure that all of the processes align with them, because it is a multi-agency tool. So we're just waiting for confirmation there. However, everything that's in the policy has been piloted and is in use now. So for example, if a young person comes onto a school site with a knife or drugs, there's a clear process that needs to be followed by the school, and there's clear follow-up for those individuals. So in the past, for example, a child may be excluded or permanently excluded for having a knife or drugs on site. Now they may be excluded, but there's also follow-up and intervention by a party. So it's either the youth service, the youth justice team gets involved, or someone like St Giles Trust, so that there's that follow through, because what we were finding is some of these youngsters were reoffending. So by working with the multi-agencies, everyone's agreed to it. We're just waiting for that final feedback from the police, but I've got 2 officers that are working with them now over the last few weeks just to confirm. So it should be ready to publish in the next couple of weeks to circulate. The self-harm and suicide guidance, that was part of a working party of a regional looking at incidents that have occurred, learning from them and informing the policy updates. So it is with health now to finish off their sections, but it should be ready to be released in the next few weeks. My lead EP is leading on that, and she's in liaison with them to get the next timeline. So they are in the process. They're due to be finalised in the next couple of weeks.
Well, that's really good to hear, because of course self-harm and suicide is all part of the mental health issues that our children are currently subjected to. So thank you for that, Katie. I think it's you now, Andrew.
Sure. So if I talk about the safeguarding training, so this has started this term as an online training provision. So there's 2 elements of training that are given to education staff. There's an introduction to safeguarding, which everybody attends, and that's to be repeated every 2 to 3 years. And then for team leaders and those working closely with families, there's a second level of training, which is recognition to referral. So a online recognition to referral training did take place in October, and that was for central staff as well as head teachers and designated senior people within school. That's delivered by a range of staff from within children's services and within regeneration, investment and housing. That will be repeated again in the second half of this autumn alongside the initial training. Every 6 months we take a snapshot of where everybody in education is and whether they're due for renewal or if they're a new starter and they need to take initial training. So that's a standard programme that's now running.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other hands raised, please, Neil?
No other hands, Chair.
Right, in that case, I think I should say thank you very much to all the officers who've been present with us this morning. And we look forward to seeing you again at some point in the future. In the meantime, I hope you all keep well and look after yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you. And don't forget to pass our thanks on to staff across schools and the education department at the authority.
Thank you, we will, Councillor Watkins. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you would like to leave us now. Thank you. So, friends and colleagues, I think we just need now to have a look at our forward work programme. Neil, is there any guidance that I should have from yourself?
Currently at the moment, Chair, the next meeting will be on the 12th of January. You'll be discussing the 2021-22 draft budget proposals and the medium-term finance plan.
January the 12th.
Yes, at the same time.
The focus will be the draft budget proposals.
That's right, yeah. So coming to those meetings will be Sarah again, the head of children and young people and adult and community services. So they'll be discussing their proposals with you.
Sally and Chris?
That's right, Chair, yes.
Right, thank you. Has anyone got anything they would like to put forward into this forward work programme? Please, if you do have any suggestions, they'll be very welcome. Nobody with any suggestions at the moment? I've got a suggestion then, which would be, I think I would like to know more, and maybe we all ought to know more, about the Youth Council and how the Youth Council is operating, what its membership and makeup is, because as explained earlier by Councillor Cleverly, they no longer feed into the Youth Council from youth groups because those youth groups aren't there anymore. So I think what would be helpful would be a short presentation with regard to the Youth Council and perhaps somebody who sits on that to let us know just how that is operating. The other thing I think we might consider looking into is how the youth offending service is being delivered, particularly, at this time with all the COVID situation. So how do people feel about those two suggestions?
Yeah.
Chair, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay for me.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Laura.
Yes, and for me. Yeah.
Thanks, Carmel. Any other suggestions, please? All suggestions are very welcome.
Can I suggest Chris Evans, Councillor Chris Evans, his daughter is on the Youth Council. I don't know whether you'd be able to get her to attend to give it feedback.
Well, I think this is something that we need to look into, find out exactly who sits on the Youth Council, and possibly my suggestion would be that, we just get 2 or 3 of them in to tell us what they're about, what they do. It would give us an insight into how that operates. And in terms of the youth offending service, I think we would need, a manager to come and tell us how that service is being delivered.
I think it's Tracy McKim that would be a contact for the Youth Council. I believe I'm sure it's Tracy. Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure Tracy has a lot to do with them.
Tracy does, yes.
Yeah,
Right.
I was just going to say, I'm sure Neil will be able to find out and will make the appropriate approaches. Anybody else with any suggestions?
I think we need to find out first how the Youth Council operates and whether it's still operating during the COVID-19 restrictions.
Yeah, I think you're right, Trevor.
Before we go into it any depth.
Yes, but how it's working and how it operates, I think is quite important. So, and certainly we need to know if COVID has made a difference to how it operates. It probably has.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. COVID will have impacted, I think, on the youth offending service, but we need to know how that service is being delivered and, you know, what are the issues, if any, because those kids are amongst the most vulnerable, the ones who, you know, get hauled in to the youth. I think it's called the Youth Justice Service now, isn't it? As opposed to the youth offending.
Yes, it used to be the youth offending team.
Yeah, now I think it's the Youth Justice, but I think that it's quite likely that they will have been impacted to some extent by COVID, because kids have been off school, kids have been out there, you know, who knows. Thank you for agreeing that we also look a little more in depth at that.
Oh, excuse me, Chair, Councillor Richards has got his hand up.
Yes, absolutely. Come in, Councillor Richards.
Yeah, I think I'm not disagreeing with the Youth Council suggestion or the youth offending system, but I think as a committee before the January the 10th, we need perhaps the terms of reference of these committees, i.e. the job description, you know, who they report to, so that we're not starting off just questioning people. We understand who they represent and what function they perform.
That's a good point, and I think we could ask you, Neil, to provide us with that information, particularly in terms of the Youth Council.
No problem at all, Chair, I can find out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other hands raised, please? I'm so sorry, I can't see any hands raised, unfortunately, on my chat.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Forsey has sent in the chat a suggestion from Councillor Marshall to look at the Welsh language. Sorry, is that in schools, Councillor?
Yes, please, in schools, and the target to have 1 million speakers by 2050. Are we on course for this? And are we meeting the requirements for Welsh language?
Those are, it could be on the agenda. Those are questions that could be put to Sarah Morgan and her team.
And more widely across the city, I think, within the council. Both, you know, as a something on the agenda in the future.
Can we put that as a possibility, perhaps for maybe not the January agenda, because we are going to be looking at draft budget in depth. But
Yeah,
after that.
Yeah, that January one, that'll be a packed one for you. And the next meeting will be on the 2nd of March. So with the suggestions that members have made, I can certainly see who can be invited and put them on that meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. That sounds good. Now, are there any other hands raised? Any other suggestions, please?
No hands raised, Chair.
Right. So do we feel that we've learnt from today's meeting? I think we've asked a lot of questions and I think we've had some, you know, very good answers. What does everybody else feel?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
As a parent, it's quite reassuring to know what's going on. Sometimes we're all governors, and and you know, you sort of insulated into your own schools, but so it's quite nice to understand what's going on across the city and our demographic, because obviously every school is different and some schools have more requirements for additional learning needs, you know, BAME and different things. So it's really good to understand that the summer was used for learning and going forward, and that's reassuring for me that, you know, they spent the 6 weeks holidays, and not as holidays really, but doing a lot of training for this blended learning, because it was a bit sporadic and it was a bit disproportionate between different schools. So I feel quite reassured by that, really.
Yes, yes, I agree. And it will be good to get this plan with regard to blended learning that, you know, will be implemented then presumably across all schools in the city. Yeah.
I think.
Sorry, please.
Comment. I was going to say, I think it was very interesting to learn that out of 370 year groups across the city, that there are 16 who are self-isolating. So that does help to put it into some sort of context, doesn't it? I was wondering about the question I asked and action 5 about the serious and organised crime. I think it would be nice if the report had a little more detail in it. We did get a bit more information after we asked the question, but the pilot study is being undertaken. It would be nice next time to have a little bit more information about that in the next report. And the other thing that I think would be nice to have a bit more information about in a future report is the homeschooling, and what the numbers are, and whether there is any evaluation of whether the homeschooling is good, bad, or
working.
Yeah, different things. So.
Homeschooling is a real concern for me, because I am aware that, you know, there's a wide variety of ability amongst parents to be able to deliver teaching. You know, teaching is a skill, and there may be some parents that have that skill, but I think there may be a lot of parents who don't have that skill, and it concerns me greatly that those children are going to be missing out, and that will affect their futures enormously. It also concerns me hugely that the monitoring appears to be very, very lightweight from what I've heard today. What does anybody else feel?
I was concerned that what Sarah said about when they homeschool them, if they take that they're not allowed back into school.
Yeah,
they have to reapply, and we all know how much the waiting lists are for the schools. So they've lost their place in the education system, basically.
That's something I think we should challenge, because it doesn't seem right.
Yeah, but is that, Chair, is that a local government, a local authority policy, or is it a central government policy? This is a big political hot potato, isn't it?
Yes.
There's been lots of discussion nationally, locally. I'm sure that Newport.
John, you could be correct there.
Oh, absolutely, you could be correct, and we should find that out.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to add to your list, please, Neil.
Yeah, sure.
His list is getting longer.
Just to make sure I've got this right, would members like me to contact the relevant person in regards to homeschooling to see if we can get a number of how many pupils are currently being homeschooled at the moment, and see if I can get information sent out as like an information report?
I think we do know the number. It's in the report. It's gone up from 130 to 156. I think what we don't know is whether that homeschooling is judged to be good, bad, or indifferent.
I think that's right, and I think we also need to clarify as to whose regulation it is that these children, once they're taken out of school and into a home learning setting, whose who has decided that they can no longer pick up their place back in school? That's the point that Councillor Richards has raised, and we need to find out if it is a Welsh Government directive or whether it's a local authority decision, Neil.
Okay, no
Please.
problem, I've got that.
Thank you.
I mean, I think we should also bear in mind that there are thousands of children across Newport in school, so it is a very, very small percentage.
It is, Yvonne, but nonetheless, we have a responsibility to try and ensure that every child receives the best education to support them for their futures.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, I did ask that question, but I am saying it is still worth bearing in mind that there are thousands of children that are in school, and it is a small number, small percentage.
Colleagues, is there anything else that you would like to raise from today's meeting or with regard to future meetings? And then no. Silence reigned.
We're fine.
So is it cup of coffee time? I think it is.
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Neil for his support to me.
Well done, Neil.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Absolutely, thank you. And I wish you all a good day and hope you keep safe and well. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Neil, would you stay on for a moment, please?